and then tweak the settings along the way. And then I can consistently get the vocal sound I want. But developing that is a long time-consuming process. And the funny part is that I look back to 2012, 2013, and I didn't know what I was doing. Like compared to what I'm doing now, I spent so long trying to get these mixes and beating my head against the wall. And people be like, I don't like the mix. And I'm like, it sounds great. And just when I look back, I'm like, yeah, I get it now. And yeah, it's funny. It's funny how that goes, but that's the path of
you put
the
in
whole
your
thing.
reps, you put in your hours, and I love that. Yeah, dynamic EQing is a big part of what I'm doing also these days to get good vocals.
Yeah, it's the only way to control the 2 to 6K region properly is it's got to be dynamics. Static EQ is an interesting thing because if the problem were static, then it would be the right choice. But the problem doesn't always happen. So it's got to be a dynamic situation. And that's something that I teach interns. I say, when you're going to EQ something, is the problem always or is the problem sometimes? Such as a rumble filter, right? So yeah, that's a 80 hertz
always
high
or
pass.
sometimes. That's great.
That's what it is, right? So,
Yeah.
3 times in this recording, I needed something to de-harsh. Well, then it's not a static equalizer move. It's something that only gets triggered on a threshold 3 times, or you should automate that, right? Otherwise, you're ruining audio. Right. You're degrading a signal source that didn't have a problem. So massaging audio is good, but all of our tools tend to massage in a compressor-like fashion, so it's always taking away or pushing down. And so you have to remember to kind of rebuild. And I like harmonics and harmonic saturation for that, to rebuild after I've done some good EQing. Instead of trying to EQ something I just EQ'd. You know what I mean?
So in terms of like saturation, do you have any like not to get too we could just get specific, but like do you have like
No, I can always ask.
Favorite saturators to kind of make up that mid-range area that gets kind of can get a little bit anemic sometimes.
Yeah, so anything that gives you control is really what you're looking for. If it's too broadband, then you can't get targeted on what you're doing. So, for example, I love Sugar process audio, I think is what it is, Sugar. I love Sugar, but Sugar has 4 bands and they're very specific. Slate Digital has Fresh Air. I love Fresh Air, but it has 2 bands and they're very specific. Cush Clairphonic I love the Cush Clairphonic, but it has 2 knobs, each can switch bands. So there's a few different configurations you can, but it's very specific. The left side of a Cush Clairphonic is like 800 hertz and 3000 hertz. So then the right side has a bunch of different high shelf options. That doesn't going to give you everything. If you did a bunch of cuts at 2400, neither one of those knobs is going to help you. So first we have to know what we can, what we're trying to rebuild, and then which stuff can actually do that. So for that reason, Waves Vitamin has long been a favorite of mine. So in 2004, I went to Mix with the Masters. I was very blessed to attend Mix with the Masters. Jack Joseph Puig.
Oh, amazing.
It was
amazing.
It was amazing.
So good.
Yeah. He definitely scrambled my brain, and that was really where the major shifts happened for me in a lot of reasons. But I had a very dynamic. I had a very climactic moment where he tore me a new one. And
I literally just interviewed somebody where like their takeaway from Mix with the Masters was instilling confidence. I love.
Oh, that's how he did it. So basically, I went in there and I brought in my best stuff. And so everybody's different, but at my Mix with the Masters experience, they said, bring, a session and he's going to open it up and listen to it, and then he'll screw with it and you'll learn some stuff. And so he did this with every single person. And when it got to me, I said to him, I was like, I love this. I've learned so much from the other 14 participants and you remixing their records on the fly, because it totally makes sense what you're teaching us. But instead of doing that to one of my songs, can I take that time and play you my highlight reel and then listen to it for real and like tell me what's going on and like help me evolve as a producer on a global thing? Like, what am I doing wrong? Because it's not going to happen from one Pro Tools session. You need to hear patterns and things. And so he listened to my best 3 songs at the time. And we sat there and he thought about it. And then he basically said, he goes, you understand what elements are supposed to sound like. You know that a kick drum's supposed to sound like a kick drum, and you can EQ it to sound like a kick drum, snare drum, guitars. You get it. Like you have a good representation of each instrument, so that's not a problem for you. But he said, but the problem that you're having is that you've got too many elements competing for the spotlight in your attempt to play with the stereo field. It's like having a bunch of people singing different songs all at the same time. Nobody's singing the same song together. And he said, that's a consistent theme for you throughout all of the songs I've heard. And on top of that, the lead vocal sounds like you pushed her out to go to prom without any makeup on. So she's in the dress, but she didn't have any makeup on. So you need to figure out how to make her a supermodel audio speaking. Because if anybody knows JJP, he's a wizard type. He's definitely like the Wizard of Oz type. And so everything he says is not technical, although if you press him, he will out-tech you because he's definitely a techie. But he speaks very mystically and very artistically. And if you're on that vibe, it's great. So he really slapped me around a lot. And it's interesting because it was production arrangement that he's like, okay, so you've recorded all the elements, but it's a chaos. It's chaos. That's why like it's too much to listen to. I don't know what's going on. And so that conversation permeated for a while and we really got into it and talked about it. And the whole 15 of us all really got into this, what makes a good production arrangement. And it's hard to describe, but there's definitely a critical mass where you've thrown too many elements in and then it starts degrading. Right. And one thing to think about is if you're making music that has a big space in it, like a big reverby space, you have to treat reverb as one of the elements of the mix. It's not an afterthought. Because if you've got a rock band and you've got 10, 12 instruments playing and they're all playing in concert and it sounds great, you're not really listening to the reverb. There's no you can't really hear it through the pan sphere, like the pan sphere. In between the different elements, it's too much. There's too much stuff. So like reverb almost doesn't matter in that context. And actually it's really brave to go dry because it's very intimate and forward and punchy. And people tend to hide behind these effects. You know, I'm being mystical on that. It's not always true. But ever just try and make a mix sound dry. Like no reverbs, no delays, but actually make that thing bang. It's tough. It's really hard, but it sounds really cool when you get it. But it's hard, right?
It's like the Wildflowers record, you know, that opening track.
Interesting. I'll have to go back. I love that record.
So dry. Yeah, Rick Rubin, you know, and
on his lead vocal.
His lead vocal's totally dry.
I don't remember. Yeah. All right, I'll go back and listen to it.
It's hard to do it right. I'm scared. Right. I'm scared. I don't think I've ever done a fully dry vocal for a production or mix that I've, you know, been hired for. It has to make sense. It has
to make sense. So what does it mean? What would it mean to have no reverb? It would mean that the record is intimate. It's got to probably be something like that where it's chest voice. Oh, here's a good story. I was blessed to be invited to join the Grammy NARAS voting members. I say that. I had to submit for it, but I had people that recommended me for it. And so I was very blessed to be let in. They didn't come calling or anything. So I get to go sometimes to these local Nashville events. COVID happened and we haven't really had anything. So it's been a little bit quiet. But right before COVID, Lauren Daigle did a Q&A with, I think it's Jason Isbell and Paul Mayberry, I believe, who wrote and co-produced. I think Paul Mayberry is the producer, but either way. And it was
I've interviewed somebody. I've interviewed somebody named Dwayne Lundy from Lexington, Kentucky, who's worked with Jason Isbell.
Well, very talented, very, very talented.
Yeah.
And so the three of them did a Q&A at 1979 Studios, which is an awesome place of the headquarters of Mara Tape Machines. She said, it was doing a Q&A and it got to me and I said, okay, I'm thinking, you know, I always try and think differently than the average person asking questions. And I said to her, I go, hey, Lauren, and if you don't know Lauren, she's just such a fantastic voice. If I were going to engineer a session for you tomorrow, forget the why, how would you want me to do it? What would you want me to set up for you? Creature comforts, mic chain, like what would you want me to do for like a real Lauren Daigle song? Not like a demo, you know what I mean? Like this is a final vocal. And she thought about it for a second. She said, I don't really need any creature comforts, you know? She was like, I have my preferred mic chain. And then she kind of like didn't understand the question. I mean, maybe she understood it, but maybe she didn't want to spill her beans. And so it kind of circled back around, and it was my turn to ask another question. Again, I said, actually, Lauren, I was like, I really do respect what you do. Like, will you open up a little bit more? Like, how do you like to record? Like, explain it, because this is really fascinating. I mean, you're in a room full of the PG&E wing, right? We're all producers and engineers. Like, this is what we want to know. How are you getting those lead vocals? And she said, she goes, after she thought for a little while, and I guess she had that moment. She goes, well, F it, I might as well, open up. And she said, I only like recording after midnight. I said, oh, that's fascinating. Why? And she said, because it's the only time I feel like the world is quiet, my phone isn't ringing, and the noise of the city has droned down, and I feel like I can commune with the Holy Spirit, because she's very Christian, right? That's a big part of her thing. And so she said specifically it's after midnight. So if you want to make a Lauren Daigle record, you're not making it at 10 a.m., right? So that's interesting. So you have to be open to that, which reminds me of that the guy in Maui who went and recorded, was it Maui? Somewhere in Hawaii, who recorded the Somewhere Over the Rainbow at 4 a.m. That story.
Israel something.
Yeah. So you got to be open to the right thing, right? And then she said the other thing that's really interesting about some of those records is she said that there's no hi-hat and very little crash cymbals, and if there are, it's very dark. So when you go back and listen to that kind of stuff, listen for the fact that there's no tss, 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 right? And then there's also no big like psh, right? There's nothing that can screw with her air in her vocals. And that's a specific thing she said. She's like, I don't like those because part of my vocal stylings is this breathy air that I have. And she's like, and I want to highlight that, and it gets lost in the mix if it's there. She's like, so you got to mute all that stuff for me. I'll sing over a single instrument because I want to hear. And she's like, and I want to hear it in the headphones, and I want the effects, and I want to hear how my S's trigger the reverb, or the air in my voice triggers whatever. And I tell this story because we're talking about raw vocals. If you don't have a raw enough vocal, someone like Lauren Daigle's songs aren't going to have the impact, because she's at such a low volume in her chest voice to get that airy thing, that if you had it all popped up with a bunch of reverb, it would just be this cacophony of air hitting the reverb and behind it.
Right, yeah.
So it's a fascinating thing. And it has to suit the record, and it has to suit the audience, but you can play with that a lot. It's really cool. And texturally speaking, I love playing with textures in a record, which is difficult.
Yeah. Before you get to textures, I was thinking, this made me think of, I saw this actually, it was also a mix with the masters thing. I saw a video on YouTube of the guy that mastered the Billie Eilish record, like, talking about how he did it. And he basically said, it was weird. It was a weird song to master because it was so bass heavy. And then he realized that the vocal was the treble. It's basically like the rest of the track is bass and the vocal is the treble. And that's kind of, and she's like totally an artist that has that kind of chest, like low volume chest thing, that exactly how you were describing, to get that air. And her vocal is always so intimate sounding.
Well, isn't that her whole thing, is that Billie Eilish is all about the AMSR? Is that right? ASMR? AMSR?
I don't know.
That auditory.
I'm the wrong. I'm a millennial, so I'm the wrong
whoever,
generation.
that your listeners will know what I mean. She's doing that. Like, when people hear food.
Yeah.
Yep. In the headphones, and they do that binaural thing. That's a big part of her vocal sound is listening to her on headphones. So that intimacy is really interesting, because if you were to bathe Billie Eilish in reverb, she wouldn't be forward and in the middle of the headphones. And what happens when you're in headphones and there's that vocal up in the center? We pretend it's us. Right? Because it's sitting where our own voice sits in our own head, like literally in our skull that's between the headphones, because of phantom center.
Yes.
So it feels like you're singing it. And that's kind of the fun part about being on a great set of headphones, is it's like it's my voice. But if you were to bathe it in a reverb, it would no longer sound like me.
Right. Well, now it's in a space, right?
Exactly.
Now it's Wait, so get into texture. Tell me a little bit about vocal texture.
I think textures are one of the hardest things to get in any record. I think that, if all things are the same, we can all get pretty good sounds. But when you talk about like textures, and I think that's why we love and covet vintage gear, is that some plugins offer really great textures. Textures always seem to be getting rid of highs, distorting, degrading, crushing, clipping, wow and flutter. You know what I mean? They're always adding weird things that are getting less neutral and really there's a deficit somewhere, right? It's always you're getting smaller. But if you can do that